everybody. How are we doing this evening? 7 o'clock. I guess we're going to go ahead and get started. As usual, when doing live on YouTube, there's a lag between what I'm saying and what you're seeing. So we probably got about, I'd say, a 30-second lag. So that's where we're at right now. Hopefully you guys can all hear me okay. If you can't hear me, go ahead and put something in the chat and I'll catch it here in about 30 seconds. But tonight we are doing, we got several people out there. Everyone's saying hi. I love that. I love seeing who's here with me. So tonight we are doing periods 1 and periods 2. Now, for my people in my class, I sent you a link to a note sheet. And that note sheet, all it is basically the questions we're going to answer for each unit. And what we did, and like I told you in class today, and I'm going to say what we did, what Steve Heimler did, Heimler's History. That's where I got the idea to do this. What he did was he took the curriculum, the APUSH curriculum, and what he's going to do is he creates these big idea questions directly from the key concepts. And those are the questions we're going to answer tonight. So I sent you guys a link via a text message. If you didn't get it, no big deal. If you look in the comments or in my in my link right below the video, there's a link to my website, and on the website you can go to APUSH Review and there's a copy of the note sheets there as well. But even if you don't have the note sheets, I'm going to share the questions with you as we go. So as you're taking notes or whatever, it's all going to be there for you. So I don't want you guys to panic or anything like that. I got my notes right here. I want to make sure that I hit everything. I'd love to say that I could do this all through memory, but I'll be honest. I get going and sometimes I just start to forget stuff. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat. My students, if you have questions, you can send me a text message and I'll answer those from there as well. So that's how we're going to communicate tonight. Hopefully we'll be out of here 45 minutes is what I'm shooting for. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start with Unit 1. Now, like I said, we have questions that we're going to answer, so I'll share these questions as we go. The very first question, the very first big idea that we need to address is the Native American populations in the Americas were a diverse peoples with different ways of life that was shaped by the environment in which they lived. So your goal is to be able to talk about these diverse peoples and how their lives were shaped by the environment they lived in. Okay, so what you have to remember about the people, and this is 1491. 1491 is before any Europeans got here, predominantly before Columbus arrived. And what you have to understand is there were Native Americans here, obviously, but it wasn't just like one group of people. We had hundreds of different Native American tribes, and their lives are going to be dictated by the environment in which they live. And I don't know if you guys remember, but at the very beginning of the year, all the way back in August, I had this map on one of my presentations that shows you all the different regions that the Native Americans lived in, as well as the different tribes that lived in there. So when we're looking at the diversification of especially North America during this time, this is what we are talking about. So when you look at these different regions, you got to just remember the big ideas of what type of lives they live. So if we start off in the Northeast, these were heavily wooded areas. There were a lot of waterways, a lot of rivers and stuff like that. You had predominantly farming and agriculture going on there. So you had permanent settlements. The way that the people lived there, they lived in longhouses. It was communal living where you had, 40, 50 members of a family all living in the same log house. The tribe that is most associated with the Northeast is going to be the Iroquois and their confederacy. So if you tie the Iroquois with the Northeast, you're good to go. Down in the Southeast, when we look at that area, again, a very heavy agricultural area. Farming and trade are going to be a major staple of their survival in this area. The Cherokee are a great example of this region. When we go into the eastern woodlands area there, again, you're going to see a little bit of a crossover between the woodland and the southeast. And when I talk about this area, you're primarily looking at the Mississippi River Valley. Now, when you think river, you've got to think trade. because of the waterways, we can move goods back and forth. And that's not just with Native Americans, but that's going to be later with the American people as well. And when we look at this area, agriculture, trade, number one, the tribes you want to think of is the Cahokia, the Mississippians. They're going to have the large mound building people, and they're going to build these, like the Cahokia. I shared a picture of that city with you. It was a large city that was built in the Mississippi River Valley. Now, when we move into the Great Plains, well, that's, the plains. I mean, there's not a whole lot going on there. So you have the hunter-gatherers in this area, and they are going to follow the tribes. Now, when you think of the Plains Indians, these are the ones we think about when you think about the movies and stuff, living in the teepees and hunting the buffalo. And you're going to see tribes like the Comanche and the Arapaho and the Pawnee and those tribes. And I think that's what most Americans think of when they think of Native Americans. As we move into the Great Basin area, again, similar to the plains, they're going to be more of the hunter-gatherers, the nomadic lifestyle. The Utes are a great, UTE. The Utes are a great example of those. And then finally, as we move further to the northwest and down along the California coast, you have mostly fishing and also permanent settlements here as well. You have along the coastal plains, you have permanent settlements because they rely on fishing, they rely on plant life and the such, and also trade because, again, waterways. And when you get over into this area, I mean, I always think of those up in Alaska, the Eskimos and the drawing a blank on it, the Chinook Indians. So those are the regions of North America prior to Columbus arriving. So when you go back to that question of explaining the diversification of the people of North America, that's what I want you to think of. You should be able to look at each one of those regions and be able to list a tribe. You don't have to list them all. Give one tribe for each one and talk about the lifestyle they lived in that region, okay? So that's big idea number one. Big idea number two, the Europeans came to America for various reasons. Now, you have to think of the driving force behind Europeans coming to North America. Why were they going out into the world? Well, this is going to be spurred on primarily by the Crusades and what we were introduced to in the Crusades. And you're also going to see a lot of political unification in Europe at this time, and more centralized states during this time period. And a lot of this goes back to the Crusades and is going to come out of that. Now, one thing the Crusades introduced to us was a lot of new goods, spices and cloth and different textiles. And the upper class, the wealthy of Europe, were very much wanting all these new goods. The problem they faced was in order to get to Asia, where all these goods existed, they had to travel through Muslim-held territories, and it was very difficult to travel across land. So they're going to start looking for new ways to get to Asia in order to bring these new goods and these new commodities into Europe at this time. The first nation to do this is going to be Portugal. Portugal is going to go out and start venturing into, new lands, but they're not going to head west towards North America. Instead, they're going to start moving south down into Africa, into the continent of Africa, possibly looking for that route that goes down below the Cape of Good Hope and around that way, and then up towards India and China. Now, the thing is, one thing you have to remember is, though we are motivated by these new goods and everything in Asia, and we're motivated by the growth of our nations and all this other stuff, we needed the proper tools to do it. And technology, the scientific revolution is going to be occurring during this time, and we're going to have these new maritime technologies that are going to come out. Astronomical charts are going to start coming out. The astrolab's going to come out. New ships, the caravel is going to that's the ice cream. Yeah, the caravel is going to come out, and you're going to see that it's much easier to cut and steer. And that's the wrong term, but through the waters and stuff like that. So this new technology along with this new drive for goods and power, is going to come together at the same time to spur this European exploration. Now, like I said, the Portuguese are going to be first, and they're going to focus a lot down in the Western African territory. But then the next major power that's going to get involved in exploration is going to be Spain. And what they're going to be motivated by, well, first of all, they're going to experience the Reconquista. The Reconquista is the reoccupation of the Iberian Peninsula. Muslims had come in and taken control, and now the Spanish have regained that control back. And now it's about rebuilding, their empire, and also spreading Christianity. They had wrestled the peninsula away from Muslims. Now they wanted to take their religion and start spreading it to build their influence throughout the world. Now, the first person to do that, to represent Spain, Columbus. Columbus is going to be financed to be sent over to find that route to Asia, and he is going to head west. The Portuguese headed south and east. Columbus, Spain, is going to head west, and he's going to run smack into the Americas. Now, when Columbus gets there, what we're going to discover is a lot of wealth. And we do find gold, we do find metals and stuff like that, but we find a lot of trade goods as well. And as we find more and more wealth in the Americas, that's going to be a pull factor to bring more and more European powers into the Americas. It starts with Spain, but then you'll see France come in, you'll see the Dutch come in, and then eventually you're going to see the English come in. So you're looking at these different reasons why Europeans came to the Americas and started to explore. And Spain is going to introduce us to a lot of opportunity for wealth in the Americas. Okay, so that's big idea number 2. When we get to big idea number 3, let me scroll down here just a little bit. Okay, big idea number 3. This is one that's often overlooked, guys, but you can't overlook this one. And that is the Colombian Exchange resulted in massive changes in both Europe and in the Americas. Okay, we tend to think, oh, Colombian Exchange, that's just the exchange of goods and food and stuff back and forth between Europe and the Americas. But it's easy to overlook the importance of this because the Columbian Exchange is going to change both worlds. It's going to change them permanently. Now, when we look at the Columbian Exchange, we're considering this an exchange of peoples, of animals, of plants, and of diseases or germs. And most of that is going to come to the Americas, but you're also going to see, or most of the negative is going to come to the Americas, but you're going to see a lot of positive go to Europe. So you have these goods traveling this east and west pathway between the two. So let's talk. You gotta, if you're going to talk about the Columbian Exchange, let's say you get a short answer that talks about the effects of European exploration. You got to mention the Columbian Exchange. And if you're mentioning the exchange, you've got to mention some of the goods. You got to give those details. You just can't say the Columbian Exchange. What was in the Columbian Exchange? So let me give you some examples. When we talk about I'm drawing a blank. When we talk about goods coming from America into Europe, so going from America to Europe, you're talking about foods like potatoes and corn, and animals like the turkey. I mean, the turkey, but come on, the turkey, that's Thanksgiving. We got to love the turkey. But you also have these goods coming from Europe and going into the Americas. Cereal goods, wheat and rice are going to be introduced to North America from Europe. Animals, the big one we always talk about is the horses, and the effect that the horses have on Native Americans absolutely changes their life. They're now able to hunt from horseback, and they're going to learn to do that. And especially those nomadic tribes in the plains and the Great Basin, and even in the Southwest, they're able to hunt the buffalo using the horse. But you're also going to have cattle come in. You're going to have other domesticated animals like pigs, and they're going to have kind of a negative effect on Native American lives because they, the way the Native Americans do agriculture, these domesticated animals are going to cause a lot of damage in those areas as well. So that's, food and animals that are coming over. But the big one, I think, that has the biggest effect on the Native Americans is going to be disease. And if you mention disease, the disease you got to mention is smallpox. We are going to see disease just sweep through the Native Americans, where we're going to see nearly 90% of their population be devastated by disease over the next 100 years or so. 90%. I think the numbers I've seen is that before Columbus arrived, there was over 4 million, at least, Native Americans in North America. 90% or even more are going to be wiped out by disease. But it's not just the Native Americans who are going to feel the effect of the Columbian Exchange. Obviously, these new foods, these vegetables and fruits going from the New World over to Europe are going to extend European lives, the life expectancy of people. But something else starts happening in Europe. You're going to see a shift with the Columbian Exchange. You're going to see this shift into more trade and more economic relationships between people, and that's going to spur that shift from a feudal lifestyle to a capitalistic lifestyle. So we're looking at a shift in the economies of Europe because of the Columbian Exchange. And with that, you're going to see the rise of things like joint stock companies, where groups of people will come together and seek a way to combine their resources to go and venture out and to colonize on their own. And all of this is a result of the Columbian Exchange. So if you're given that opportunity, don't just overlook that as a quick, hey, real quick answer. It's an exchange of food and goods. There's the economic implications, there's the social implications, there's the political implication. I'm not even saying that word right, but implications, and all that is tied up just in this exchange of goods between the Western Hemisphere and Europe. Okay? So that's big idea number 3. All right, any questions up to this point that I can answer? I'm doing a quick pause. All right. Nothing coming through. No text messages. Here we go. Big idea number 4. The arrival of the Spanish fundamentally changed the social and economic makeup of the Americas. Okay? The Spanish fundamentally changed the social and economic makeup of America. We know, I just talked about the Columbian Exchange, but when you talk about the Spanish coming over to North America, you have to acknowledge the encomienda system. Remember, the Spanish are going to come in, and this encomienda system is a system of forced labor using the Native Americans. We saw that this forced labor is going to be not very successful as far as the Spanish are concerned, because these Native Americans they're using, the first thing, they're going to be affected by disease. You're going to lose a lot of labor, and it's not easily replaced because of the smallpox and other diseases that the Spanish are going to introduce to the Native Americans. But you're also going to have I'm drawing a blank. The Native Americans, basically, it wasn't easy to keep them in this role of forced slavery because it was very easy for them to escape. They could easily get away. They knew the terrain. They knew how to hide. They knew how, just to disappear into the wilderness. So the Spanish, while they implemented this encomienda system of forced labor, it's not going to be very successful due to the disease and the fact that the Native Americans were not easy to hold on to. Then they're going to have to look for a new system of labor, and that's going to be the introduction of African slaves coming in to North America, and the Spanish are going to start using them. And obviously, you already had interaction in Africa at this point with the Portuguese and others. So it was very easy because the Portuguese were already dealing in the African slave trade. And now Spain is going to work with them to bring the African slaves over here. You're not going to have the same problems because Africans had already been in contact with Europeans, so that it's almost like they've built up an immunity. So you're not going to have the same problems with disease when you bring these people in. The other thing is they're not going to have an easy time escaping. It's not like the Native Americans who can just merge back into another tribe. The African slaves are going to not have that ability to do that. So they're going to become the primary labor source in Spanish America for a while. Another major social effect of the Spanish coming into North America is going to be the caste system that's going to be set, a societal system of different levels. And of course, at the very top of that level, of that social caste, is going to be the native-born Spaniards who have come to America. And then as you work your way down, remember I showed you a triangle, and I think it's in those one-page notes that you have. The next step down is going to be Spanish, native Spanish who were born here in America. And at the very bottom is going to be the African slaves and the Native Americans. One major group, though, that you should be familiar with is the mestizos. The mestizos were a new, basically, group of people that are going to be created out of the Spanish coming to North America. And the mestizos are a cross between the Spanish and the Native Americans. So make sure you know them. What else? We're going to see, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I'm giving you everything. So we're looking, that's the social changes that are going to occur here because of the Spanish arriving. The labor that's going to be used is going to be used for agriculture. It's going to be used for mining, whatever it is. And remember, we had permanent settlements being set up by the Spanish. They are coming here. They're looking to build their empire. So they're going to do that through land. Land was seen as a commodity at this point. So they're going to build their empire. So permanent settlements, and these settlements are going to grow and spread through the mission system. The Spanish, remember, after the Reconquista, they want to spread Christianity. They want to spread Catholicism. They want to do that here in North America as well. And part of the encomienda system is going to be the attempted conversion of the Native Americans. Okay? All right, so that should have been big idea number 4. Let's go to big idea number 5. Big idea number 5. As a result of the interaction with one another, Europeans and Native Americans' understanding of each other changed over time. Now, there are a lot of differences between the Spanish and the Native Americans. Obviously, you got to look at how they view things in life. Now, let's look at religion. I was just talking about that, how the Spanish wanted to convert the Native Americans. The Spanish viewed Christianity, or they viewed the religion, it was a monotheistic religion, one God, Christianity, Catholicism. Whereas you looked at the Native Americans and they had a more pantheistic relationship with religion. And so the two did not mesh. And as the Spanish tried to convert the Native Americans, you started to see, some give and take where, at first the Spanish want to convert them 100%, but then they realize that's not going to work. So they're going to allow the natives to actually hang on to some of their culture and some of their religious practices and stuff. But they absolutely view religion differently, and it's regional. We talked at the beginning about the diversification of Native American tribes throughout North America. As many tribes as there were, that's how many belief systems there were. So it's not like the Spanish could come in and say, okay, this is how we deal with this group's religious beliefs over here and expect to get the same effect when you deal with this group over here. For example, the Spanish were also settling in Florida at this point. The Native Americans in Florida are not going to have the same beliefs as the Native Americans in the Southwest. The Pueblos and the Seminoles are completely different. So they're going to have to find a way to interact with both. And that's going to take, there's going to be some negotiations. There's going to be some give and take and stuff like that. So that's with religion. With regards to land, like I said, land was a commodity to Europeans. It was something that was bought, it was sold, you could own it, and then you could sell that ownership to somebody else. And land was the equivalent of power. And the more land you had, the more powerful you were seen in society. Well, Native Americans had a completely different view of land. They believed that they had that the people had a connection to the land, and that it wasn't to be owned, but it was to be used by everyone, and and everyone had the right to the same land. So there was no such thing as fences, and there was no such thing as my grazing, my land grazing over here and your land grazing over here. There was none of that. It was we all are tied to the land, and we are connected to the land. And so you had that conflict when these two groups come in. Not all, there weren't all conflicts, though. We tend to look at the relationship between the Europeans and the Native Americans as this conflict-based relationship that just never changed. There was some, cultural appreciation of one another. There was some cultural appropriation, sharing their cultures and stuff like that. You have the natives are going to start picking up things like using the tools and the, basically the tools and the metals and the weapons of the Europeans when they come over here. And the Europeans are actually going to use some of the Native American practices, especially with regards to farming and stuff like that. I mean, this is in tomorrow night's discussion, or actually, no, it's in tonight's discussion, but the Native Americans, are actually going to help the English colonists when they first get here, especially in the New England region, when, with farming and how to grow things. Think of Squanto and the Pilgrims. So there is some cultural sharing going back and forth. So it wasn't always about conflict. Was it most of the time about conflict? Yeah, it kind of was. But there were some moments of, hey, can't we all just get along for a bit? Okay? So the other thing I want to mention is the relationship between Europe and the European settlers. There was a view, and the two names I want you to know that you should know when you talk about the relationship between the Spanish and the Native Americans. The two names you should know are Juan de Sepulveda and Bartolome de las Casas. These are two men who are going to debate. It's called the Valodid Debate. And at the Valodid Debate, they are going to debate the relationship or how the Native Americans should be viewed. Now, Sepulveda is going to look at the Native Americans as less than human, and that the Spanish benefited from the encomienda system. And for that reason, the encomienda system should be left to perpetuate, to grow as the Spanish Empire grows. Even though there was conflict, even though there was difficulty and they had to bring in the African slaves, Sepulveda believed this is the way it should be. But there was another man, Bartolomé de las Casas, a Franciscan monk, who is going to talk against the encomienda system. And he said that these Native Americans deserve the same dignity as human beings that we do. And he is actually going to be successful in petitioning the king and the ruling class of Spain to actually bring the encomienda system to a complete end. And the conquistadors who are over here running the towns and running the growth of the Spanish Empire are no longer going to be able to use the encomienda system because of de las Casas and the work he did and how he spread the word to the ruling class of Spain as to the harsh, mistreatment of these Native Americans. Okay? All right. That is period 1, 1491 to 1607, 1491 on. So what questions do you guys have about period 1 that I can answer? I didn't really talk about the French and the Portuguese, or French and Dutch. I'll talk about them here in just a minute. Any questions that I can answer about period 1? So 1491 all the way until 1607. Here we go. Kyle, I don't know if you caught when you don't. Okay, simple answer. You need to know the different regions and maybe know one tribe per region. So that's be familiar. You don't have to get into the nitty gritty of their lifestyles, but if you know the Great Plains were a nomadic hunting gathering lifestyle, and the Northeast were a sedentary agricultural based society, that's the kind of thing you need to know. You don't need to know that the Iroquois lived in longhouses or the Cahokia were mound builders, stuff like that. Just be able to discuss how the Native Americans in the different regions tied their lifestyle to the environment in which they lived. Okay? So that's what you need to know. And if you can talk about a couple of examples of that, you'll be fine. But don't try to, when you look at this map here, when you pull this up, no, you don't need to know every single tribe on here that lives in every single region. I would just say, I want to know one tribe in each of the major regions: the Northeast, the Southeast, the Plains, the Great Basin, and the West. That's how I would approach it, okay? And honestly, if you're going to see a question like that, you're not going to see a lot of questions about this. Remember, period 1 is only 5% of your exam. Good question, though. Okay. Any other questions I can answer before I move on? Because we're getting ready to go to period 2. Okay. All right, let me change my sheet here. All right, let's get to it. All right, let's go to the note guide and let's look at period 2, which goes from 1607 to 1754. And you have big idea number 1. The Spanish, the Dutch, the French, and the English I lost it. I'm looking at two different things here. Spanish, Dutch, and English projects of colonization were motivated by different goals. All right, here we go. We talked about what motivated them to come over, but now let's talk about what they hoped to obtain once they got here. Now, it's very easy. The easy way to talk about the motivation for what their goals once they got here is going to be the 3 G's: God, glory, and gold. But each one of them viewed those G's differently, okay? The Spanish were all about the extraction of wealth from North America. They wanted to build permanent settlements, but they wanted to use those settlements to extract wealth from North America, be it gold or be it, cash crops. You're going to see plantations being created down in the Southwest, and so the cash crops are going to, fuel the Spanish wealth in North America. The Spanish also wanted to spread Christianity. Already talked about that. That was one of their goals, was to spread their faith, spread Catholicism to all the people they came in contact with. But what they did was they placed the Native Americans in subjugation. They subjected the Native Americans to their rule. Man, my words are off tonight. So remember, using the encomienda system and then actually ruling over the Native Americans. That's what the Spanish were going to do. It was about them maintaining control of their region and extracting the wealth from it. Now let's compare that to the French and even the Dutch. When the French came over here, and the Dutch as well, they're looking more for trade relationships with the Native Americans. They saw the Native Americans as a value-added incentive to them coming to North America. We talked about intermarriages between French fur trappers and the Native American tribes in order to have those guides to take them through the valleys and the rivers to find the best place to hunt. So that's going to be a big difference between them and the Spanish. The big thing that the French and Dutch, to the most part, are going to be looking for with regards to trade is fur. They're not going to be looking for agricultural crops or anything like that. They are looking into the fur trade, number 1. Now, while both the Dutch and the French are not building a lot of permanent settlements like you see with the Spanish. I mean, most of their settlements are trading posts. They do build a couple sustainable or substantial permanent settlements. For instance, the French had Quebec and the Dutch had New Amsterdam, which will later become New York. Now, with regards to religion, we're talking God, glory, and gold. With regards to religion, they had no desire or no driving, want to convert the Native Americans. The French did share their faith with the Native Americans, but it wasn't about converting them. If the natives wanted to convert, great. If they didn't, fine. You know, it was just about sharing their faith. The Dutch had more Protestant, whereas the French were Catholic. The Dutch were Protestant. I mean, even less so. Again, they would share it, but it wasn't about converting the Native Americans. The Dutch also, keep in mind, they were really focused on trade. New Amsterdam was just a trade hub for them. And think about, if you think about New York and you think about right there on the Hudson River and other rivers, all those rivers are going to allow for ships and boats to get up to get more trade goods to take them to other parts of the world. During the early 1600s, going into the mid 1600s, the Dutch were the number one trading country in the world. They had a trading empire, so this was just part of that empire. Now, when we get into the British, honestly, guys, they are coming here for several different reasons: economic growth, land, and religion. And depending on the region you went to, that's why the English came here. Now, let's be totally honest. The English crown is not going to support colonies over here unless there is an economic gain for them. And so that is really the number one reason for English colonization is economics. Now people within England are going to come to North America for their other reasons. But they're going to add to the economic growth of the English Empire. So when you look at the economic growth, you have a lot of inflation over in England at this time. And so they're looking for more trade goods. They're looking to expand and everything like that. So they'll look to the New World as far as land. In England at this point, you had the enclosure movement. There was hardly any new lands available for England. My gosh, it's an island. There's only so far it can expand. And so because of the enclosure movement, you have a lot of people, especially the second sons in each family, who are seeking land that they'll be able to grow their own families on. Remember, you had that law of primogeniture during this time where the first son got everything. The second son got nothing. So what's he going to do? There's no new land in England? I'll go over to America. There's plenty of land over there. And then finally, you're going to see the groups like the Puritans and the Separatists come over here seeking religious freedom, somewhat seeking or trying to escape religious persecution, but absolutely, coming here for religious motivations. So here are the three big reasons for the English. And the English are really who we're going to talk about from this point on. You have economic prosperity, reason number one. Social mobility, reason number two, that's the second son looking for lands and stuff. And finally, religious freedom. Those are your three reasons for English colonization in North America. Okay? So those are, when you look at that, the big picture, those are the motivations of colonization here in North America. Only the Spanish and the English set up permanent settlements. Numerous permanent settlements. The Dutch and the French, it was primarily just for trade. Okay? All right, let's go. Big idea number two. The British colonies in North America differed from each other in their goals, population makeup, and society. Absolutely. You guys gotta realize that just like you had all this diversification with the Native Americans, you also had diversification with the colonial regions in the early 1600s. The very first colonial region, I'm going to kind of jump around the map here, but we're going to start right in the middle around Virginia, the Chesapeake region. When we talk about the Chesapeake region, that's going to be the region that surrounds Chesapeake Bay. So we're talking Virginia, we're talking Maryland, and to an extent, parts of North Carolina. This is where you had English colonization based solely on economic prosperity. They're coming looking for the Momo. They want the money, baby. And that's why Jamestown was founded. Jamestown is going to be founded in 1607. It's primarily going to be settled by single men. Their primary economic funding is going to be agriculture. It's going to be the cash crop of tobacco. Now, initially, they're going to start with labor systems of indentured servants. And that the indentured servitude program is going to allow, that you refer to the headright system, is going to allow for people to have their passage paid to come to the New World, to come to the Americas. And in exchange, they'd work as a slave for 6, 7, 8 years, whatever their contract was. Very difficult life. In fact, most indentured servants didn't live to the end of their contract. But that was the labor system that's going to be introduced in the Jamestown, in the Virginia colony. 1619, we're going to see the first African slaves arrive in Jamestown. Now, we're going to see African slaves throughout the colonies. It seems like the further south you go, obviously, the more slaves, or the bigger the slave population is going to be. 1619 is when African slaves are going to be introduced to the English colonies, but it's not going to be until about 1676 when you start to see an incredible rise in that population, because 1676 is marked by Bacon's Rebellion. And if you remember correctly, that was a revolt by former indentured servants. And, you also think about, there's only so many people in England who are willing to have, to be indentured, to come over here. So the numbers of indentured servants availability is dropping. You have former indentured servants revolting against the colonial government in Virginia with Bacon's Rebellion. So that's going to spur a huge increase in African slaves in the colonies. Right around 1676 is when you're going to see that happen. Like I said, the Chesapeake region, major cash crop is going to be tobacco. Okay? Now let's jump up to the New England region. The New England region is going to be settled around 1620. That's when the Mayflower comes over and the Pilgrims are going to come over. Now, we have two religious groups coming over to the New England area. You have the Separatists, which are the Pilgrims, and you have the Puritans. These are completely different groups. The Separatists, the Pilgrims, they weren't really looking to escape any religious persecution, to be totally honest with you. They had actually been living in the Netherlands. They had left England already and they went to the Netherlands. And what they found, they had complete religious freedom there. But what they found was they were living in urban areas and they were mostly farmers. They were seeing their children start to take on Dutch culture, and they were losing their English roots. So they determined that the Netherlands was not the right place for them. That's when they looked to the Americas, and they're going to get a charter to come over here, and that's going to be the Plymouth colony that they're going to found. Before they even step off the boat, they're going to sign the Mayflower Compact. Now, I'm going to talk about government here in a little bit, but this is when the Mayflower Compact is going to be signed in 1620. Now, that's the Pilgrims. And I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Native Americans that they had a pretty good relationship with the Native Americans up front, because that's when Squanto of the Wampanoag tribe is going to come, and they're going to help teach them how to grow and how to farm in this region. The other group who comes into the New England region is going to be the Puritans. Now, they're seeking an escape from religious persecution. The Puritans were seeking to purify the Church of England, meaning that they were attacking the way the king and the bishop were running that church in England, and were basically being punished for that criticism. So they're coming over here to escape that persecution. Both the Pilgrims and the Puritans are going to come over in family units, all right? Whereas we saw in Jamestown in Virginia, the Chesapeake region, single men. New England, you're going to see families coming in. And what they're going to create is religious-based societies, okay? So that's going to be your, New England region and then your Chesapeake region. Right between the two is going to be the area we call the middle colonies. The middle colonies are often seen as the most heterogeneous societies in the colonial system, because they're going to attract all different kinds of people. They are basically being created it's an economic base, but you also have a religious base, such as Maryland is going to become a haven for English Catholics. Pennsylvania is going to welcome all religions in there. So there's going to be, mixed motivations coming into the middle colonies. Now, when we talk about the middle colonies, we're talking New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, that area right there. Their primary economic structure is going to be trade, because they're right off of the coast. They have a lot of rivers in their area. There's a lot of large forests and everything like that. So, shipbuilding and trade is going to become the predominant economic force in the middle colonies. But they're also going to have agriculture. Cereal crops are going to be grown there. Wheat and oats and barley. Their nickname was the breadbasket of the colonies. So that's the middle colonies. And then finally, when you go into the south, the southern colonies, again, it's going to be agriculturally based, primarily economic motivations. A lot of cash crops are going to be coming out of the southern colonies. Again, we mentioned tobacco, but you're also going to see rice. You're going to see indigo, sugarcane. When you look at the colonization of the Americas, we primarily talk about what's in North America, but actually the English colonies stretch down into the Caribbean, into that area as well. So you're going to have a lot of sugar crops that are grown in that area as well. So those are the different regions of the colonies. And keep in mind, a lot of it's driven by environment, just like we saw with the Native Americans. The environment of the South allowed for heavy agriculture. The environment of the middle colonies allowed for these winter-type crops like wheat and everything. And the geography of New England, not a lot of agriculture, maybe some subsistence farming, but that's about it. But mostly trade and logging and shipbuilding and stuff like that. Okay? So that was big idea number 2. Let's look at big idea number 3. Make sure I got everything. Oh, let me just, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up just a little bit, because I want to talk a little bit more about society, specifically government. I mentioned the Mayflower Compact, but I also wanted to talk about the ideas that are growing in all of the colonies at the same time. And we're going to find that most of the colonies are going to have this democratic value system that's going to start growing. The Puritans, Isabel, founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So the Puritans were in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. That was in 1630. Their leader was John Winthrop. Remember, City on a Hill and all of that. Okay? So these democratic values are going to start to grow in the colonies, and a lot of it is spurred because of their distance from Great Britain. I mean, you're talking weeks, sometimes months to get across the ocean, and so you had to come up with a system of governing for yourself, because you couldn't wait for government direction from the mother country at this point. So, like I mentioned, you had New England that had the Mayflower Compact in 1620. They're going to have a religious-based government, but it's of self-government. And you're going to have, it's going to be a community-based. They're going to have town meetings where, everyone has a voice. All the men have a voice in the government in the New England region. Now, because it was a religious-based society at this point, if you weren't a member of the church, you really didn't have a voice in the government at that point. Now, obviously, that's going to change as a lot of these colonies start to grow. But in the beginning, it's a religious-based self-government there in New England. The other thing I wanted to point out, so the Mayflower Compact is the big piece of government there. Think about they have town meetings and stuff. The other big thing you should know about government in the colonies, I would say, is the House of Burgesses in Virginia. The House of Burgesses is going to be formed in 1619, I believe. 1619. So right about the same time the first slaves arrived. And that's going to be a representative-based government. And so it's key that you know these two ideas, that you have this democratic-based style of government where the people have the power, the people have the voice, but then you're also seeing the formation of a representative style of government. So we're moving towards the foundations of the government that we have today. But don't think that this was all established from scratch over in the colonies. A lot of them are just recreating what was already existent in England at this time. So there you go. So that's kind of the governing. When it comes to other parts of government, I think a lot of the colonies just kind of follow suit. As you move further south, you're going to see more representative style governments. As you move further north, you're going to see a little bit more democratic, more town meetings and stuff like that. And just think about, the land they live on. The further south you go, the more farther apart people live. So it's difficult for them to travel. Whereas you move north, you have more heavily populated areas. So town meetings are much easier to have. So that's why you have the little bit of difference. But they mold together. They're going to come together, and you're going to see, democracy and a form of republicanism, this idea of representative democracy, start to grow out of all of this. Okay? All right. Now let's go back to the big ideas. Big idea number 3. What kept colonization viable was the great wealth being generated by the transatlantic trade. Now, as I said, England is going to support all these colonies because England's making a whole bunch of money. And as long as they're making money, they're going to keep things going. So when we look at this, the big idea, mercantilism. And the mercantilism is this economic system where colonies are going to support the mother country. The mother country is typically going to pull raw materials out of the colonies and refurbish those in manufactured goods and sell them to other markets, as well as new markets that are being established in the colonies. This idea of mercantilism is going to globalize trade. And the big example of the globalization of trade during this time is the triangular trade. You need to understand triangle trade for this time period when you're talking about the economics and the wealth that's being generated by the colonies. So when you think about it, this triangular trade occurred between North America, between Europe, and Africa. Okay, or actually, you could even make it, different, North America, Africa, and the Caribbean. But no matter how you did it, you're making a triangle. And basically, the major goods that were being sent over, it starts with sugar. Sugar in the Caribbean is going to be shipped up north to the New England region, where they're going to make rum out of that sugar. Then that rum is going to go over to Africa, and that rum is going to be traded for slaves. And then the slaves are going to come back across the Atlantic. We refer to that as the Middle Passage. The transportation of slaves from Africa to the Americas, the Middle Passage, a horrific passage of this transportation of human beings in the most vile conditions you can imagine, where the loss of life was superseded by the sheer numbers of people they were bringing. So they considered it not much of a loss if people died, because they had so many people crammed on these ships that were being sold into slavery. But they would reach the Caribbean, traded for more sugarcane. Sugarcane goes back up north to New England, made for rum, and you see how the triangle starts going. I'm making a really cool triangle with my hands, but you probably can't see that on the screen. But also involved in that triangular trade are going to be raw materials going to Europe in exchange for manufactured goods, which can then go down to Africa to trade for slaves that are going to come back over to North America. And this is this globalization of trade that is being developed from the English colonies. But it's all driven by mercantilism. Now, because of that, and because England was making so much money from it, they're going to pass a series of navigation acts. And these navigation acts are going to be put in place to try to control the colonies and how they trade. And they're going to have rules like you can only trade with England, or all goods must be shipped on English-made ships. Or if you're trading with another country, you have to go through an English port and pay taxes on that first. So all these navigation acts are going to be thrown into place to try to maintain England's control of this globalized trade. But here's the thing. As time went on, as we go into the 1600s and later into the early 1700s, while the navigation acts are in place, they're not being enforced. And that's going to introduce us to that big term of salutary neglect, where laws are in place but not being enforced, and then when you try to enforce them later, good luck with that. I think the example I've used is if your parents let you go out every night, all night for years, and then one night they tell you you have a 9 o'clock curfew and you got to follow it. Good luck with that. And that's what's going to happen when we get into the late 1700s. But all of this is in place at this point, and this is this wealth that's being generated by the colonies for England. And as long as they're making the money, if they're not enforcing the laws, oh well, because they're making enough money to overcome all that. Okay? All right, here we go. Big idea number 4. Let me scroll up a little here. As European colonies became more established, European powers maintaining different policies in their interactions with Native American peoples, which led to conflict. So, as the European colonies got more and more established here in North America, we're going to see more and more conflict with the Native Americans. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, but let's chat a little bit about it. You started to see these wars with Native Americans start to grow during the 1600s, primarily due to English encroachment or English movements into their lands. One of the first set of wars that we're going to see are going to be the Powhatan Wars. It's going to be a series of 3 wars between the Virginia colonists and the Powhatan Indians. I don't expect you to write this out, but it started with a war between Opechancanough, the father of Pocahontas, and the Jamestown settlers. And it's just going to grow from there. You're going to have a series of 3 wars, and it's all about English encroachment on Native American lands. Another major war during this time that you need to be familiar with is in, the year, I can't remember the year. This is in the late 1600s. This is going to be King Phillips War, also known as Metacom's War. This is a war between the Wampanoags and the Puritans. This is going to take place up in New England. And what's going to happen is Metacom is going to become frustrated with the English encroachment on Wampanoag land. He is going to bring in other tribes, and they're going to fight together against the Puritans. It's during this war, during King Philip's War, that you have the massacre at Mystic River. And we talked about that in class, but that was that huge massacre of Native Americans at the Mystic River village, where they set the village on fire and then shot the people as they tried to escape from the palisades around their village. But all of this had to deal with English encroachment on their lands. But it wasn't just in the English colonies that we saw conflict with the Native Americans. We're also going to see it with the Spanish colonies as well. 1680, the Pueblo Revolt, where you're going to see the Pueblo Indians rise up against the Spanish, and in doing so, actually drive the Spanish out of the Pueblo territory for almost 4 years. This is going to lead to the Spanish easing up on their pressuring the Native Americans to accept Spanish culture. They're going to allow the Native Americans to hold on to pieces of their culture and pieces of their religion just to maintain a semblance of a peaceful relationship so they don't have another revolt. But you're going to see these kind of skirmishes throughout our history as our country grows, because England, first the English colonies and then the American states are going to want to continually spread west. And as we do that, we're going to run into other Native American nations who are going to push back against us. So these conflicts, the more we interact with Native American people, it seems like the more conflict we run into. So that's big idea number 4. Let's go big idea number 5. All British colonies depended more or less on enslaved African laborers, but some enslaved people actively rebelled against the system. Yes, people, slavery was existence in every single colony in North America at one point. But as I said earlier, you saw the slave population grow more and more the further south you went. And that was just because the demand for labor was much higher in the south than it was, say, in the New England region. Remember, New England settled by families. Southern colonies settled by basically single men and investors. So you need more labor down there, which is going to increase the need for African slavery. Now, slavery, as it grows, we're going to start seeing a viewpoint of slavery change. And we're going to see slavery more as what we call chattel slavery. And chattel slavery basically is property-based slavery, where indentured servants were, in a sense, slaves, but they weren't seen as property that could be bought and sold and traded. That's the difference with the African slaves. They're going to be seen as property and less than human. And so they are like another commodity, is how they're going to be viewed. And as our country, as the colonies grow, and then as our country grows, you're going to see our dependence on slavery start to grow. But there will be rebellions. We're going to see some slave rebellions, and some of them are going to be covert rebellions, and some of them are going to be overt rebellions. Covert rebellions, that would be things like, one thing, the slaves would maintain their African culture. That was a form of rebellion. They wouldn't take on the culture of the Englishmen, but they maintained their African culture, sometimes in private, but they did that. But then other forms of covert rebellion would be like tools would break. They'd break their tools so they couldn't work as much, or they would fake being sick so they didn't work as much, and that's going to affect the bottom line of these plantations. But there were overt rebellions as well, and one of the most famous ones that you probably should be familiar with is the Stono Rebellion, which occurred in South Carolina. And that's going to be in right around 1739, 1740, right around that time. And you're going to see a revolt of slaves, who armed themselves and are actually going to march through an area of South Carolina and burn plantations and kill people. And this will become the fear of Southern landowners, is that these slave revolts are going to start to grow. Now, you don't see revolts like the Stono Revolt like every week and stuff, but it's in our memory. And as we move as we move into the 1800s, then we're going to have another rebellion like the Nat Turner Rebellion. And then the Nat Turner Rebellion, that's kind of like the Stono Rebellion. Oh my gosh, it's growing. This rebellion is growing. And so that's going to lead to fear in Southern landowners. So that's just a bit about how we did become more and more dependent on African slavery, especially as these cash crops grow. But that's going to lead to more and more rebellion against the system. Now, one point I want to make, guys, very quickly, because I see this mistake over and over again. Periods 1, periods 2, and really the first part of period 3. Cotton is not a cash crop. It's slowly going to be started growing, but it's not seen as that cash crop, that economic boom, until the 1800s. So if you're in periods 1, 2, or 3, you shouldn't be referring to the cash crop of cotton yet. Okay, just put a note somewhere that you don't do that. All right, getting there. We're almost done. Taking a little bit longer than I thought, but that's okay. All right, here we go. Big idea number 6. Colonial society both resembled English society and developed its own character. So you are going to see colonial society resemble a lot of things we see in England. And I mentioned that earlier with the government structure. But when we're talking about government, I want to talk about something that's starting to occur over in Europe during 1720s, 1730s, and that's the Enlightenment Movement. And you're going to see this rise of European thinkers, and they're going to come up with these new ideas about governing and how we should be governed and how we're born with these natural rights of life, liberty, and property, and the social contract that the people give power to the government, not the government gives power to the people, but we have this social contract where we alleviate some of our power, we give that to the government in exchange for their protection of us. These ideas are born during the Enlightenment. What the Enlightenment is going to do over in Europe is it's going to start to weaken the religious authority in that area, and that's going to come over to the colonies. So these Enlightenment ideas are going to transfer over to the colonies, and you're also going to see them threaten the religious authority within the colonies. And what it boils down to, guys, is it's a debate. When you look at Enlightenment versus religion, it's a debate of your mind versus your heart. You have all these great new thinkers, these new ideas that are, it's all about your mind and what we think and empirical knowledge and what we get from experiments and stuff like that and what we can see and put our hands on, versus religion, which is based on faith, which comes from your heart. So it's mind versus heart, and these are starting to conflict a bit in North America as well as in Europe. Now we're going to find a way for them to mold together to create the this independence movement in America. But at first, it's a conflict. And that's what's going to lead to the First Great Awakening. And the First Great Awakening is going to be led by clergymen that we called these New Lights. And these New Lights are going to preach against this loss of faith that seems to be spreading in the English colonies. And that, that faith, that because of this enlightenment, we're drifting away from our faith. And we have, and they say we have this empirical knowledge of Jesus and the gospel. And we can't be pulled away from that just because of this new way of thinking with regards to government and science and stuff. And so we need to experience. I mean, the Enlightenment started talking about having empirical knowledge. So this knowledge based on experiments and through through experiments, experiences, stuff like that. And the First Great Awakening is saying that we need to have the experience of Christ in our lives. We can have that same experience that the Enlightenment thinkers are talking about, but we can have that in our faith, and we can experience Christ in our lives. And one of the biggest voices of the First Great Awakening is going to be Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards is going to actually bring revival to the north through the New England region and stuff. Now, he's going to stay up there, but he's going to be one of the most famous First Great Awakening leaders. But the guy who spreads it throughout the colonies is an Englishman of all people by the name of George Whitefield. And George Whitefield is going to travel from colony to colony to colony and spread this idea of revival throughout the colonial region. Okay? So we're going to see, what we're really seeing here is our first real national movement in the colonies through this Great Awakening. And we're going to see the very beginning of a national identity starting to be formed. And it's through the First Great Awakening. It's through some of these Enlightenment ideas about natural rights and social contract, and then this religious revival, and they're coming together, and that's the beginning of what we call a national identity for the Americas. So this is the beginning of it right here. All right, let's get to our very last big idea, and that's going to be big idea number 7, where it says British colonial policies led to an increasing mistrust in the American colonies. We're going to see some political structures and stuff start to come into North America. And believe it or not, it's during this time in the early 1700s, we're about where we're at right now, 1730s, 1740s, when we're going to start seeing British actions such as impressment, where they're going to start seizing colonial men and pressing them into the service of the British Navy. And you're going to start seeing a slow growth of resentment towards some of the British policies being pushed onto the colonists. And the colonists are going to start slowly at this point, not a lot, but slowly you're going to start seeing a resentment of English policies superseding what's going on in North America. That salutary neglect is starting to get little chinks in it. You're going to have people like, I shouldn't have said I shouldn't have even thought of him because his name would have been there. Was it Greenville? I'll get you the name. I'll let you know tomorrow night. But he's going to come in and start enforcing the Navigation Acts. They're going to start impressing colonial men into service in the British Navy. They're going to start, and you have the colonists at the same time saying we have natural rights and we have this social contract, yet the English are starting to take advantage of their, the monarchy and the power and parliament over us, and they're starting to implement that here. And so that's going to start causing some mistrust to slowly start growing. Not enough to even think about independence at this point. Just enough to kind of grumble about it at the dinner table. But grumblings often grow into revolutions. And that's what we'll hit tomorrow night. Okay? That's period 1 and period 2. So I did go longer than I wanted to. I went about an hour and 10 minutes. I was hoping to be 45 minutes to an hour. But do you guys have any questions that I can answer about periods 1 and 2? Get some water here. Got about 16, 17 of you like here right now. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come through. What I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and get ready to sign off now. What I'll do is tomorrow night, when I start at 7, tomorrow night we'll be doing periods 3 and 4. So that's going to be 1754 all the way until about 1848. And so I'll open it up with questions. So if you have any questions from tonight, you can ask them tomorrow night to start things off. But that's going to do it for tonight. That's going to end of period 1 and period 2 review. Hopefully that'll help you give you a good starting point to go and do a little more in-depth studying. Hope you have a great evening. And with that, I'm going to say goodnight, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.